The people of Iran are crying out for help and basic necessities like water and electricity. Watch this video. I'll start with a few clips of the protests, and then I'll give a breakdown on the situation, what's going on. So go ahead, watch this, and then listen to my response and or breakdown at the end. Let's go.
علی گودرز مامورا دارن با تفنگ میزنن مردم عادی رو.
Now there's more video I'll play here, as I also will go through this Newsweek article followed by an article from the Washington Post to describe exactly what's going on over there in Iran. And I'll make sure I put the links to both articles in the description box below. But let me go ahead and play this video from the Newsweek article. Getting real tense over there in Iran. So just to give a little backdrop to what's going on, there were massive protests as a result that have actually turned deadly, according to a lot of the information we're receiving on the ground, as security forces from Iran have killed a couple of individuals in the protest, firing into the crowds, as you've seen from some of the video provided, as a result of massive water shortages amongst the people who are going thirsty, as well as major power outages, and that's coupled with everything else. And they are getting the heavy-handed response from the Iranian government, apparently. So the article goes on to say, at least 3 people are believed to have been shot dead since the protests erupted about a week ago, with at least 1 police officer reportedly among them. Officials have blamed criminals for the death, while the opposition activists and human rights groups have actually blamed the security forces of Iran. Drought has left homes and businesses without reliable access to water. The shortages have also throttled Iran's hydraulic electric network, causing regular blackouts in the Khuzestan and elsewhere amongst the country. Many of the videos were provided by members of the quote-unquote outlaw group, the People's Mujahideen of Iran, MEK, which also appeared to show security forces clashing with protesters. In some instances, you saw in the video Police and security agents can be seen firing what appears to be fireworks at gathered demonstrators, as you saw in the earlier video just a few seconds ago. You have one Iranian here, Zari, who refuses to give her full name out of fear of retaliation, but she is a 25-year-old law graduate, says at the beginning the demonstrations were peaceful and there was no violence on the part of the people, but unfortunately the regime responded with bullets, which is why you saw many streets on fire. It started with water, that is the drought shortage issue, but the core problem is the regime itself. The regime cannot solve the real problems of the Iranian people. We've been witnessing for decades the plunder and exploitation of the wealth of the Iranian people. The crimes of this regime, one might think that it's only the water problem, but it's absolutely not, end quote. So they have a real problem with the regime, the way it's mismanaged the country, the distribution of wealth and consolidation of wealth among a few individuals while keeping the majority of the citizens poor and without necessary and basic resources like water and right now power. You know, these protests have shaken the regime currently undergoing a presidential handover. And current president has, and a former president of Iran has backed the protesters. The former president said Thursday, demonstrators have the right to speak and, quote, express themselves, protest, and even take to the streets within the framework of the regulations, end quote. He's blamed opportunists and rioters for some of the violence and killing of the demonstrators. And they seem to also be having massive internet issues, as NetBlock's internet monitoring service reported on Wednesday a significant regional disruption to mobile internet access in Iran. And now you have human rights news activist agency, the news arm of the U.S.-based human rights activists in Iran group, has reported that at least 18 activists have currently been arrested by security forces since protests began, again, a little over a week ago. Human Rights Watch Iran's researchers said in a statement the government's authority need to ensure the right to peaceful assembly and stop security forces from using excessive force, end quote. Iranian authorities have a very troubling record of responding with bullets to protesters frustrated with mounting economic difficulties and deteriorating living conditions. And this, they're actually referring back to the protests at the end of 2019 when Iranians across the country took to the streets to protest the new fuel tax at the time, and the demonstrations quickly morphed into a broader anti-regime movement, which resulted in at least about, or roughly about 1,500 people being killed as they tried to, the government and the regime security forces tried to suppress the fuel tax protests. Here we have an article from the Washington Post, once again talking on the situation protests over water shortages in Iran turned deadly in a summer of drought and rolling blackouts. Istanbul. So residents in southwestern Iran have held large protests for nearly a week now, which, by the way, hasn't gone largely talked about, but denouncing the country's leadership amid severe water shortages in the region, according to activists and video footage. At least 2 people, and this was written 3 days ago, so looks like the number has increased by 1 since then. But at that time, at least 2 people have been killed in the unrest. The protest in oil-rich Khuzestan province along the border of Iraq appears to have rattled the government, which has been accused of responding with a heavy hand as it looks to prevent demonstrations from spreading to other parts of the country. Let me scroll on down here. Now, the leadership in Iran has been trying to blame this all on climate change. However, some Iranian environmental scientists have criticized officials' emphasis on climate change, saying it's a way for the country's leadership to deflect responsibility. And I quote, "If you're a policymaker in the developing world, like in the Middle East, it is best to blame everything on climate change because then you can say," and I quote, this was caused by climate change. I had no role in it. I could not have done anything to help it, end quote, says, if I'm pronouncing this, Kaveh Mandini, an environmental scientist and former deputy of head of Iran's Department of Environment who lives in exile, said in a lecture at Utah State University in 2019. He went on to cite Iran's population growth and efficient agriculture and government mismanagement alongside such trends as global climate change as major drivers of the water shortages. And I quote, climate change is definitely a catalyst. Extreme events would be catalyst. We also have the situation of political instability, sanctions, and all these things. They definitely contribute to the problem. The damage is already irreversible, he added, accusing Iranian policymakers to trying to mitigate the issue rather than initiating adaptive measures. And the most recent wave of demonstrations began way back on July the 15th and spread to other parts of Khuzestan, according to the human rights activist news agency, or Harana, Hrana, which tracks protests. Another group, the Centers for Human Rights in Iran, said that at least 3 protesters had been killed in circumstances that remained unclear. And the government has acknowledged at least 2 of the deaths, saying a passerby and police officer were killed by rioters, according to state media outlets. However, there are reports that authorities had blocked internet access through cell phone networks in some parts of Khuzestan, including Ahwaz, possibly to prevent the organizing of protests and dissemination of videos showing the unrest, according to the human rights group. But word has already spread. So here we have another source, the Washington Post, confirming, much like with Newsweek, that the government in Iran is intentionally disrupting internet access of the individuals, of the citizens, so that they can't even share information, they can't communicate or get anything out. And we have to rely solely, one, on the government or the regime in Iran for the information, because here they're saying these deaths were caused by rioters, not by the regime sources, where what word that is coming out of the country is that it's by the security forces.
So there you have it. The people of Iran are really going through and suffering through a totalitarian and authoritarian regime that is not only blocking basic rights such as internet access, to be able to disseminate information, to communicate with one another, to get the word out there and to show their side of the story to the world, and therefore trying to dictate and control the narrative that the Iranian government, since all information that they're trying to make sure comes straight from them, but also denying them basic human necessities such as access to water, and their gross mismanagement of the water supply that is leaving the country in a drought with no real attempts to mitigate the situation and prevent it from worsening for the future. These people are demanding better responses, better management from their government, and being met with a heavy hand, including bullets. And it's not right. And I wanted to do this video when I heard about it because I think the mainstream media is doing a really terrible job at bringing light to the situation that's going on. The people of Iran are crying out, and mainstream media is widely ignoring it, and or at the very least burying it within like page 10, 12, whatever newspapers there are, as well as their own websites. You're not going to see this in the headlines. You have to actually search for it, but who's going to really start to look for Iranian protests and shortages of water? So I just wanted to speak to it to show my solidarity and support for the people of Iran, for those who are crying out for a freedom that they may never ever realize in their lifetime. It's really sad what's going on out there. We need to raise our voices, hold our leaders accountable, to hold the government of Iran accountable for better management of their country, make sure that we are supporting them whatever way we can through charitable donations and or groups that can get access to the basic supplies like water and electricity to these people in Iran. All right, so that's my video. Please don't forget to like this video, comment on this video, share this video, because the people of Iran deserve a voice. My channel is very small, new. Your sharing this video will help get the word out there. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. This is Bruce the Boss Brooks, and I am out. Peace.